Okay, welcome. We want to thank you for participating in Design Week Portland for the week, but most especially for joining us tonight here for this event on disruptive design, and what we think will be a interesting, inspiring time for all of us. We've got a really wonderful panel here joining us. We are quite honored to have everyone that we do here as a part of the dialogue tonight. Part of what makes Design Week Portland particularly special for us, and us being myself, my name is Rebecca Kaufman-Ward, and my business partner, Britta Cabanos. We have a design firm, sounds too serious, a collective, a studio, a collaboration, a passion project that we opened exactly 5 years ago. We opened our doors during Design Week Portland. So, really exciting, and more exciting is that we've been very fortunate to be working that whole time and
Doors
busy.
Are still open.
Doors are still open. And in large part, that is a result of this community here tonight, the community that we are always so inspired by and dedicated to, that is the creative community here in Portland, Oregon. And so we feel humble and quite grateful for that. The other part of that is what we do for our real job is that we are a design organization that specializes in apparel design, and most specifically in active, athletic, and outdoor, with a bit of a focus on competitive swim. The premier competitive swim designer of like 5 in the nation, Britta. Anyway. And we work with many really inspiring brands. Wildfang is one of them. Here, a local friend, and we're proud of them, as well as Icebreaker Design, and many other companies here. So, really fortunate to do that. That's our real job, but part of our passion job is to integrate with this group and these people and continue to feed our soul and spirit in what is so important about the creative collaboration community here in Portland. So another part of our group under CCD Design is called IFD, and Britta's going to talk a little bit about that and then introduce the panelist. And Britta is also the brains behind much of what we've been doing here at Design Week Portland, so I want to give a little shout out to her too for organizing all this.
I got my mic. First, I want to acknowledge Mina. Can you wave? That's Mina. She is on our team, and so is Brianna, who's hiding way in the back. And we couldn't have pulled any of this together without them. These girls are I don't know, they're our what we call foundation, and we just rely on them for so much. So love you guys, and thank you for everything you do. So as Rebecca mentioned, inside fashion design, a lot of people have asked this question because we're creative capital and we're also inside fashion design. So IFD launched 1 year ago today. April 10th was 1 year, and we just felt like there was a need to share more stories. You know, all of the clients that we work with and all the people that we meet, there's such great stories out there, and we just wanted a place to share it. So it kind of started off as a blog idea, and snowballed, and it's only a year old, and we've got this great momentum going, and now we envision it as a online resource for the apparel industry, finding tools, finding someone to connect with, finding an activity, a workshop, resources, just even a place for inspiration. We also want to share stories. So if you have a project you're working on or even something you're struggling with, we didn't intend for it to be like a glitz and glamour kind of blog. We want to tell real people stories. So what are the challenges? What do you struggle with? You know, you can't find fabric. You want to be an independent designer, but you're looking for funding. Like, share those stories with us because we want to share it with the community, and that way we can connect further and we can find support for each other, and we can just create this little community, and we're so excited about how it's gone so far. Through all of this and just starting it, we kept meeting more people and being introduced to more people, and the connections that we've made in the last year have just been incredible, which has led to this panel. We started doing workshops in our office, very small. We can only hold 8 to 10 people, so it's a really nice intimate setting, so you get a real one-on-one kind of interaction with the workshop leaders. And what I was so surprised about was that we're an apparel company, and we put these workshops together, but we were getting attendees from U of O food science and landscaping and bike design and all of these different disciplines that I didn't expect. So, long story short, that led to meeting Bora architect firm, which we're doing collaboration with tomorrow night, which maybe Chris will mention a little bit further, but it's just been a wonderful experience to get IFD off the ground and to build it, and we hope to keep building it. And you'll find in your program a little note card. We encourage you to connect with us if you have a question tonight, if you have a comment, if you have a story you want to share, if you want to just reach out to us, whether it's for CCD or IFD, just leave us a note, send us your email, leave a question, whatever you want to share. We'd love to hear from you. Before I introduce our moderator, again, I want to thank you all for coming. And I wanted to say that we're giving 20% of the proceeds tonight to an organization we have partnered with called Every Woman Everywhere, which was founded by Lisa Shannon. She's a local author and activist, and she's been striving for women's rights for years and years. And so we're happy to connect with her and be able to give some of the proceeds from tonight to her organization. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Libby. Brian has spent the last 20 years as a Portland architecture journalist, critic, and photographer, and has served as a moderator for a variety of talks around the Portland area. So, Brian.
Thanks. Thanks, Britta. I'm just going to very loudly move this chair here. It's a real treat to be here. I love my job at moments like this because on a good day like this, I get to talk to creative people, talented people, be they designers or artists, or in the case of this group, kind of all of the above, about what they do. And it's a privilege and I think more necessary than ever to feel inspired, especially, if I may say so, during this dark cloud that we're living under nationally these days. And so, we're just hoping that you will all kind of feel that way too. And maybe it's something that helps you in your job, or maybe it's just something that's stimulating or interesting. But I've already had the good fortune to talk with this quintet separately a couple of times. And, if you get to hear half of the cool things that I got to, then we ought to be doing well. And at the same time, though, I kind of want to make a confession that when I first was invited to be part of this talk, I think I was a little bit skeptical or curmudgeonly about this title, Disrupting Design, because maybe it's just the geeky writer in me, but I felt like disruption or disrupting was kind of starting to become one of those cliches, maybe like hacking is, like people are hacking the insurance industry or hacking accounting, and I felt like, is disruption just kind of a cliche like that? But then I thought, like, to myself, it's that I was overthinking it, and that what we're really here to do is to just, learn from these people who have created all kinds of different products that really the world has kind of stood up and taken notice of. And I love the mix that we have here. We have people who are experts and have designed world-class couture and architecture, and have created amazing branding campaigns, have been involved with companies like Nike and associated with some of the great fashion brands of the world, created award-winning sustainable architecture, and they also have interesting backgrounds. I was just geeking out talking to Mark here about his knowing the Beastie Boys when he was an editor of Grand Royal, and I was talking with Sonia about London and geeking out on, my love of certain British TV shows. And I was taught, and during our prep, during my conversations with Sonia, I was hearing about, her time at Quicksilver and that, creating all kinds of, new clothing and being part of it, immersed in that culture. And I know Chris, because I write about architecture, and Chris's firm, Bora, has been doing kind of terrific sustainable architecture schools and cultural spaces. And so I'm kind of rambling on, but we're really here to hear from them. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. And so I think now we're just going to have a stage in the talk when each person has a couple, 3-4 minutes to kind of tell you a little bit about what they do and kind of make an argument. I think, some probably will be a little bit more autobiographical and some will be more about something that inspires them. But we just asked each of them to give a little presentation, and then I have a question or two individually for each of you, and I have some questions just that anybody can answer. And we also want to reserve time for, of course, audience questions at the end, and we want to have time as well at the end for you to all talk with each other and to talk separately with everyone, and maybe have some dessert as well. So do we have an order? I'll let just, whichever one of you is set to go first, I'll let you take it away.
That would be me. Who's got the clicker? Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Lewman. I'm a principal and the creative director here at Nemo Design. We're a brand strategy and design firm working in the active lifestyle space. So your Nikes, your Mammoth Mountains, your Mastercraft boats, Bell helmets, Danner boots, that's our wheelhouse. It's my alter ego, Cram Namwell, next to me. And let's talk about disruption. And Brian, I'm going to have to say you were lying when you said these were 3-minute presentations. So we're disrupting right out of the gate. The whole idea of it is kind of like the Seinfeld quote. You're playing chess and the board's made of smoke and the pieces are water, or the board's made of water and the pieces are smoke. It's really hard to come up with a formula to just inherently break things and make things and break things. A lot of it is just figuring out as you go along, and that's kind of where my journey started. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But first, let's level set about why we need disruption and what we're facing as creatives. This is what people that I go to talk to try to get their money look at me, and they see this. They look at Portland as an industry of creative people, and everybody kind of looks the same. Everybody's commoditized. We're all part of this world where there's 17,000 people in marketing and branding and fashion design and architecture in Portland making their trade. And how do you choose? How do you stand out? And then the other tension there is how, value and greatness can be really subjective. This photograph is taken by Andreas Gursky. It's called Untitled Number 2. It's a $4 million photo. That's the best photo ever taken.
Wasn't the other one Gursky too?
The other one was Andreas Gursky as well. But this is the best one. And then the force of just attention and time, and how much distraction we have and how many things are vying for our attention. And it's really hard to give much these days. And really, this is not just about a sad polar bear. This is a metaphor for, that thing is me, and that ice is my industry, and all that change that's rolling through are things like the skip button, and I'll pay an extra $10 a month for ad-free version of this, and I'm going to cut the cord. And we're constantly pushed into directions where we don't always have control over it. So that stuff, to me, is why it's important to think, how can I evade it and disrupt it and kind of build a path out of it. This photo is for sale right now. I'll take offers in the lobby. That bowl haircut on that kid is me in 1981 at my first BMX race, bicycle motocross. It's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I lost. But I found a tribe. I found people that were doing stuff that I like to do, which was like try to get my bike around a bunch of jumps and berms. And I stuck with it and built an affinity for trying to do things on my bike. Besides just race against other guys, like there was people that were doing wheelies and jumping and things like that. And this story, for me, is how I got involved with and accidentally helped create a new sport. My high school years were not very star-studded with academic, amazing things happening. I graduated. There was a magazine that was getting published out of the West Coast, out of Los Angeles, and it was covering this brand new sport called freestyle BMX. And I took a month and wrote a letter every day to the editor of this brand new magazine. And it was like, hey, we're gonna steal some plywood from this construction site and build a ramp. Here's a mixtape of some punk bands. We're gonna put on a demo at a bike shop. You know, these are the things that were going on in our world. It wasn't about trying to get a job. It was about trying to connect with somebody that I felt a connection to, because the thing they were putting out, that beacon, spoke to me. And lo and behold, they wrote back. And they said, dude, you are a freak, but you're funny. Maybe you could come to the West Coast and help us produce this magazine. So I was 17 years old. I gave away all my stuff and moved out west with a box. It's like Cortez burned the ships. I gave away my bikes and my skateboards and my records and my clothes and just said, I'm never coming back. And this was my new job. I had to make up stuff to put in this magazine. And there were challenges like, here's $400. What would you do? Oh, I'll buy that old used station wagon, cut the roof off, spend some money on spray paint, get the top 10 pros in it, and we'll go bombing around the neighborhood and honking the horn. And there was people around me that were all about inventing and creating this new sport. And it was kind of a fusion of skateboarding and the dirt jumping portion of BMX racing. And my job was to just embed in them embed in that culture as a journalist and kind of like follow and document and tell stories and be part of it, be real. And after hours, we would take the office furniture and rip around the neighborhood on it. It was kind of Lord of the Flies. There was 5 or 6 people in the editorial department that just were unsupervised and told, go take pictures of whatever you guys are doing. And this is the kind of stuff that we did to amuse ourselves and to create stories that we could kind of build on. And the thing I love about sports like skateboarding and BMX freestyle is they have this this mindset that it's not about obstacles in your way, it's about opportunities that you can like use that obstacle to do something new. So I could go out to a flat piece of pavement and be there for 5 hours trying to challenge myself. What can I do on this bike? Maybe I'll go backwards and like lift up and grab the front wheel and try that. So it was always a constant challenge to look around the world and look around your environment and kind of like adjust to that context and adapt. And what magic thing could come out of your abilities. And that's where I met people that I kind of grew up with, and one of those people who wrote to the magazine, I opened his letter, and he was 13 years old. He was from Edmond, Oklahoma, not a big metropolis for action sports at the time. His name was Matt Hoffman, and he said, hey, this is me in my driveway. I'm on an 8-foot ramp, which is, about that high, and he's doing aerials that are higher than anybody in the West Coast. Within a couple months, he's on the cover of our magazine, and it's a pretty magic thing to witness. This is Matt a couple years later. All those parts are broken. Those are things he smashed and crushed, trying to perfect his craft on these ramps. And he had broken his femur, and a doctor told him he would never walk again. And he went to a different doctor. And he was riding these 8-foot ramps, and he was realizing, it's kind of dangerous to do this, but I want to go higher than 8, 10 feet out of these things. So maybe I need to think about ramps a little differently. And his fellow professionals and fellow peers are telling him, like, nope, what are you doing? You can only get as high as you can get on that ramp. He went to Hollywood, talked to a stuntman who had some physics that he had done about how to get a bigger air. You needed a bigger ramp. So Matt was about 18, 19 years old. He took some of those bike parts, traded them to a kid across the state lines who worked at a Home Depot and got a semi-truck full of free lumber, transported it back into his hometown, had to dodge the building inspector, and put together this gigantic ramp. And pretty amazing story. He gets the ramp built. He cannot go fast enough to hit it and blast out of it. The ramp is higher than the truss in the middle of this room. So he uses a weed eater, builds a little motor on his bike, blasts way fucking high in the air. The wind blows him, he slams, he blows his spleen out, bleeds out on the way to the hospital. He's flatlined, they bring him back to life, they pull his spleen out, tell him don't do that again. And he says, I need to go faster when I hit this ramp. So he meets a guy with a motorcycle who will pull him 55 miles an hour while he holds a ski rope and explodes 25 feet, 26 feet out of the top of it. Okay? Look at the ceiling. That's how high he was off the ground. And when this photo was taken, it was a borrowed camera. He couldn't even afford to take the photo with his own camera. People thought it was pre-Photoshop, but people thought he had faked it somehow. They were like, what the hell did you just do? And today, like the X Games highest rated spots are all these giant ramps. And if you go to demos around the world, the big ramp is kind of the centerpiece to all the action sports events. The path to new is paved with no. Broken body, broken laws, broken ramps, broken physics, broken records, broken boundaries. That's what it takes, and he got told no from everyone around him and found a way past that, okay? And he's making it up as he went along. This whole sport, like skateboarding before it, kind of came from a bunch of kids who were schlepping around in the vacant lots and backyards and faking it till they made it, making it up as they advanced, and just figured out a way to build on what they'd kind of discovered. Last point I want to make here is just about time, and that's the other force on being disruptive, is putting urgency in it and making a risk kind of from the start. This guy is Shepard Fairey. He's a graphic designer and an artist who's kind of become an iconic brand into and of himself. I got to work with him. I gave him one of his first professional jobs. And he told me when he was young, he was diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 diabetes. He figured out, I'm gonna die pretty young, so I need to move fast and make lots of stuff. He wanted to have 1 million crack and peel stickers placed all over the world. He wanted to do these wheat paste assignments and just keep moving and don't worry about how professional it looked and how great it was. It was just keep it simple and get it out there. So as a final, my time is up. Before I pass the mic, I want to just say that disruption, to me, definitely incorporates the notion that you have a limited amount of time on this planet. Use it. These things may have come out of my mouth in the last 5 minutes. Thank you.
Trish.
Hi. My name is Trisha Langman. I am a textile designer, artist and teacher. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey as a creator. I don't necessarily like all the labels that come with being creative. I think if you're creative, you can kind of move into many different areas. But I play with fabric, essentially, is what I do as my medium. So you can see fabric and colour is what I love best of all. I come from sort of a family of disruptors, essentially. My parents were from West Africa in Ghana. My mum was part of the royal family. She married basically someone from a farm, essentially, who got a scholarship, and they ran off to England in the 1960s. And I grew up with loads and loads of fabric, colour, fabric, all my aunties, headdresses, and they would march around London like that, basically, with no apparent kind of care about anything. I'm not sure I absorbed all of that at that time. I think at the time I just thought, oh, this is just how my family is. And so these are the colours that I kind of had when I was growing up. Just loads and loads of batiks, loads and loads of embroidery. It was all in there, but I didn't necessarily think I was going to become somebody creative. But I guess I must have absorbed something. So I grew up in London. I was young in the 80s, and London is an incredible place if anyone's been there. Just full of creativity. We often think it's because of the weather that you just stay indoors and just create. Yeah, a bit like here, which is probably what attracted me to living here. But you know, I do love London, and Portland does kind of remind me of London in many ways. But just growing up with magazines like ID in the Face and the graphics that come with it, wasn't particularly interested in textiles at all. I thought I was going to be an illustrator. I was totally in love with drawing when I was younger. My parents thought otherwise. You know, he wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. And my dad's a PhD, so he thought that's the route we all should go. But basically, I decided that, you know, I like drawing and that's what I'm going to do. So I went to art school and I studied on something called a foundation course. So on the foundation, you get to experiment with many, many things. And this is the first time I actually sort of got to sort of maybe meet some actual disruptors. My professors who taught me were a ragtag bunch of artists. None of them made any money really, but they were pretty good. And I remember having, you know, projects where you had to work really hard and then rip things up, much to the horror of everybody in the classroom. But, you know, I persevered and I thought I was going to be an illustrator. Then one day somebody, a guy called Ken came in and maybe took a look at my sketchbook. And this is why I think sketchbooks are so important. He took a look at my sketchbook and said, you know, I think you ought to be looking at fabric. Your process that you're using is colour and texture. Have you ever thought about that? And I hadn't really thought about it at all. But I went down and had a look at a college in Brighton. And I got so excited because I saw looms and I saw knitting and I saw print. And something about the fabric, you know, the idea that fabric is laying flat, it was sort of blank, and then you could put something on it is what made me feel, oh my goodness, this is something that I could do. So I went to study in Brighton for 4 years. And it was all about just playing around with fabric. So once I got there, they said that, you know, we got a chance to go to New York for a year. I decided to take that opportunity, loved it. So spent 6 months there. And this was just like a big eye-opener for me, because I was there in the early 90s, and I was living in the East Village, and all the colours, all the people. There's a big transvestite community who lived sort of next door to us. There was kind of rich people on one street, and then there'd be sort of like crack house down the other. Just so many kind of textures and things to absorb. Nothing like my upbringing, basically. I was able to absorb all of that. And made me sort of think about what I wanted to do. I think everybody coming out of college basically thought they were going to go and get a job somewhere. I went to Paris briefly, didn't like it, so decided that I'd go back to New York, which was where I met my husband. And I said to him, you know, I really would like to sort of work for myself. But instead, you know, I went and worked in a studio for a little while. And a friend of ours, Scott, who had a loft down in Tribeca, decided that he was leaving. So he gave us his loft rent-free. So we were like, hey, maybe we should just take that and then maybe we could work for ourselves, basically. So we had 5 years of essentially no rent, and we started our business. It was like a 2,000 square foot loft, and we were able to just paint and do whatever we wanted. When we first started doing textile collection, the funny thing was it was all painted on flat gouache. So we sort of looked at that, and I thought, well, you know, I really like making things, and I realized that I was much more of a maker. So I took that and made kind of more three-dimensional things, like printing and distressing fabric. And we took, you know, I was so excited, we did this collection of 100 prints. And we went to a show, and basically everyone said it was beautiful, and then nobody bought anything. And we were so like, oh my God, what have we done wrong? And we kept getting this over and over again. Until finally, a friend of ours gave us a list of people to see, and we went over to see Ralph Lauren. And it just so happened that somebody came out and took a look at our collection, and I just stressed something so badly that they actually thought it was a vintage piece. And they took it over to Ralph, and Ralph had said, yeah, okay, I'll take this group. So we made a bit of money there. And we thought, well, you know, some people are going to recognize what we do as, you know, textiles and art. There doesn't have to be a limit on it. And I guess there was a bit of disruption there in the fact that we weren't doing it the way that everybody else did it. Instead of doing flat colour, we did something a bit more dimensional. And you can see from this picture over here, we were burning into fabric with Bora, dyeing it up and doing all sorts of things. Some people would take our stuff to and they would just say, what is this? And other people would say, hey, this is so inspiring, maybe we should try something different. And so that's all we hoped for. And we didn't have to worry about rent anyway, so it didn't matter if whether we sold or not. And so we did things like this, which was working with leather, burning into leather. We had a great time just enjoying ourselves doing this. Then one day, we got a call from Ralph Lauren, and he's basically, well, not Ralph himself, but his assistant, who said, would you like to come and work on the runway show? But we need some hand-painted dresses that are based on African Maasai's. Do you think you can do it? And we said, sure. I always say yes to everything. And basically, what happened was they said, yeah, we said yes, but then they told us we had like 2.5 days to do it, 10 dresses. We didn't have at that time, we moved from our loft and we were in a smaller apartment because by that time, we had to actually start paying rent. So we had to seriously take on some bigger commissions. But we took on this challenge, and I think this is one of the things I really love about working with little designers or big designers, just that the idea that you can get creative and develop a process and just experiment and find out that something that looks like it cannot be done, that can be done. And so they said they wanted these hand-painted dresses in 2.5 days, and they wanted it to look like Maasai, and it had to look like sort of suede. And so we came up with a process where we painted and we washed, and we put it back out, and then we painted on top of it again, and then we put it back out. And then, you know, we came up with the dresses. Ralph was really happy, went on the runway. He sold them for 10,000 a pop. And then we were basically, you know, well, you know, we got paid a bit, but we probably learnt our lesson on how to charge after that. Oops. And, oh, we're on that way. Okay, I'll look this way. Okay, so after a while, we basically had a studio we started called Fuji because we had so many people that wanted to work with us, and we couldn't do all the work basically ourselves. So we went big. I still retained a sort of way of thinking that I just didn't want textile designers designing. So we would have architects, costume designers, many, many different kinds of people working for us. So not the traditional. I ran the studio, and I made my life really hard because I would get a painter in who'd never done textiles and then teach him how to do textiles, or get an architect in. But I just like, they gave our collection a really different dimension. That's what I loved. So we didn't necessarily have commercial freelancers, but we came up with some really interesting stuff, which is what I liked. The collection got bigger and bigger, and we sold in Japan and New York. But it's we were able to kind of keep it creative. Okay.
Thank you.
It's okay. 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 Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Disruptive. Yeah. So there we are. So I became the florist. I went back to my illustrative roots and sort of did the illustration, and other people did some other stuff. But what I didn't particularly like about when we got big is I felt like we were losing something of our soul. We were doing lots and lots of big projects. We'd done a project, I think the slide sort of blanked out, but we'd done a project with Halston where we'd worked on dresses for the Grammys. One was Celine Dion was wearing it, and it'd been beaded and everything. But I think we were getting away from our actual creative roots. And we decided basically it was so big that we needed to make a move. And so I wrote to the Portland Art Institute. I wrote to Sue, who was the head, and asked her if we moved to Portland, if she would consider giving me a job teaching, because I'd enjoy being the art director. And Sue said to me, yeah, if you come over, you should come and see me, and maybe we could do that. And so I started teaching there. We moved over to Portland, me and my husband and my son, Henry. And I started teaching, and I realised that a lot about all the stuff that I'd learnt in my life as an artist and as a designer, I wanted to get people to understand that the creative process can go either way. It's not necessarily about being, I don't know, there's no right way to do it, essentially, is what I was trying. More experimentation and more about the actual process. So I actually talked to the students and told them to forget about everything that they'd learnt on the course, and basically that I was going to grade them basically on the process and experimentation and on the end product. And that kind of freed them up. And so you can see some work from here, from the Art Institute, of some sculptural forms that they worked with. And it just freed them up. It wasn't that popular, and in fact people complained to Sue about me completely because they wanted to get an A or whatever. But I decided that, I think this was the best way to go, because I think you get the best work out of people when you sort of drop that. So in some ways, maybe some disruption in the way you think about creativity. Meanwhile, I've been working on my own work as well. I had a relationship with Pendleton where we've been selling designs, and one day they said to me, we love this batik you do. Would you ever consider doing some on some of our fabric? And I said yes, not knowing how that would actually work. But I went off, and what I loved was the actual process. It took me a while to work out how to make Pendleton wool not shrink, not completely go to pot when you're putting ink on it, keep the colour flat. But again, that solving that design problem was something that I really, really love. Just that idea that it can't be done, and then you somehow find a way to do it. And this brings me to my current project, which is more about working with sustainability. When I think about textiles, I often think about how much it pollutes the earth, the waters, and so I have this kind of uneasy balance with working with big companies when they buy all the fabrics and it disappears off, and then you think to yourself, all the other horrible things that happen to the earth from that. And so for me, I decided to gather up some old suede and get back to the craft of it, basically, which is working with something that is old and making it into something that is luxurious. So bringing full circle everything that I've learned about working with couture, but also working with my hands being a maker, but able to be illustrative as well at the same time. And so I picked up a soldering iron and experimented with that, and burnt into some suede, some ultra suede and some old suede coats, and revamped them into something new. I think for me, like I could say that, am I a disruptor? People tell me that I am, and maybe I am in some ways. In other ways, I feel like I'm just about creativity and the process and just doing the best I can, and also finding a way to kind of think about creativity and craft making and integrating that with technology and seeing how that works. I mean, all of those things kind of flow into what I do, into my teaching, and into what I teach and what I do. So that is me. So thanks.
Not sure if I should stand up or sit down here. So my name is Matt Rhoades, and I was born a disruptor. From day one, the youngest of 4 sons, I was the kid jumping off the roofs. I was the kid tweaking and modifying bicycles to make them go a little faster, jump a little higher. I basically have spent my entire career kind of screwing up with style. So when I was a college student, or before college, I was trying to decide what can I do, because I really wasn't that smart in school. I wasn't very bright. 2.1 high school GPA. So I was the kid that was like, you know what, hey, what if we could try this, or what if we could do this? And people just looked at me like I was just absolutely insane. And so I look back now, at the time, it takes a ding on your self-esteem. For me, I figured, all right, well, that's just how I am. I'm disruptive, but in a positive way. So where all of my family went to college and got married and got jobs immediately, and they've stayed in the same job. You know, I went to Alaska and worked for a national park for 2 years just to try and figure out what's going on in the world. Who am I? Where do I fit? Decided, like, all right, I want to study design. I'd never taken a drawing class in my life. Never taken anything really creative. I just figured I was kind of creative. I was the kid who, I was 9 years old, I think my mom said. I had built a go-kart that went almost 70 miles an hour. I couldn't tell you how it went that fast. I just knew if I put a bigger chain on it, bigger cog, a bigger motor, I could go a little faster and do some really cool stuff. I also learned, unlike Matt Hoffman, that pain sucks. So I used to wipe out a lot, but I realized, I'm like, you know what, I'm not the crazy daredevil guy, but I had lots of crazy friends around me. And so when it came time for me to graduate in college, technology was really taking off. All of my friends, we're gonna go to Frog, IDEO, we're gonna learn about computers, and the internet was just coming up. And bonehead Matt, I'm like, I don't wanna do that, I wanna do bicycles. I think that would be really cool. I had no other reason other than I had a hunch that the technology was really starting to take off, but I really wanted to have fun. And I think there's something about that portion of disruption, of just having fun with things. And so, fast forward through Trek Bicycle, and you guys all saw my crazy bikes, which, by the way, most of those people hated. When they first came out, they didn't like them at all, especially engineering. Engineering, that Trek Y bike said it's gonna fail, it's too expensive, it's too complicated, it doesn't look like a bicycle. And I remember just deep down, again, maybe just being dumb as a stump, I don't know, I'm like, this is really cool though. There's no vertical lines, everything's horizontal, it looks really fast, it looks aggressive. Now they call it user experience, but I think I was probably one of those guys that was really tapped into that from day one. And so where I realized that vertical lines look slow, horizontal must be fast. So when the cycling industry, literally, I just decided we're gonna sculpt everything out of carbon fiber, no more steel aluminum, and we're gonna do some really cool shape work. And I remember showing it to some of the magazines, and these guys were just like, holy smokes, this is really cool. And I remember the engineering guys, to this day, 3 of them lined up on the wall, and their arms were crossed, and they were just hating. And one of the marketing guys was like, no, this is genius, this is where everything is going to change. And long story short, the Trek Y bike out there that you guys have seen, that was voted 3rd most influential mountain bike of all time. But that was my first project out of college. Hey.
I know you're gone.
I'm sorry. Do I even need this thing, I guess? And so I learned really fast that kind of disruption is a good thing. That the greatest projects I've ever worked on in my entire career were never briefed in. They were always just kind of an organic happening. And you just have to find a place to where you can get rid of all of the haters or dismiss all of the logical thinking and just kind of go with what you think might be the best way to go. But you have to continue with a story that goes with it. So, to now, I worked my way up, went through Nike for 11 years, left about 2 years ago, and I founded MATLAB. And MATLAB isn't a big elaborate firm, it's not a big agency, it's me, kind of just being crazy. In 2012, I realized that my time at Nike was kind of running short. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I was a creative director in charge of everything but footwear and apparel. And Nike is about footwear and apparel. So I was kind of the outsider guy that really needed to kind of step up and figure out what I wanted to do. And so what better to do when you have a 2.1 high school GPA and you have a design degree from school in California? Get an MBA, because I guess that's what you do. And for me, I didn't want to study engineering. I wasn't smart enough, couldn't do math to save my life, still can't. But I really like to understand how strategically things kind of fit together, especially when it comes to disrupting or doing almost the opposite of what you think. And along with this degree, I had kind of an epiphany along the way that a lot of strategic thinking comes from the willingness to make mistakes. And I took a philosophy course, and we're all learned, see, there you go. We've all been taught deductive reasoning, right? Where you start with a problem and you end with a solution. And somewhere along, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I realized that there's a thing called inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is disruption by its very nature. You start with a truth and you end with a false. You fuck it up, pardon my language. And that's a good thing, because what it does is if you're just zigging, you're going in circles. And disruption, or this idea of inductive thinking, kicks you out of that orbit into a new space. And you have to be willing, as designers, to go to a new place. So raise a hand, how many people here are designers? Like designers. How many are developers? How many are business, product line managers, all that? So this fits every category. That when you talk to a consumer, they're only gonna tell you what they know. They're not gonna tell you what they feel or what they think. You have to watch and observe and watch the things around them in the periphery to understand what they're all about. And so coming out of graduate school, I really wanted to come up with a new way. IDEO had all this design thinking, mumbo jumbo that was kind of going on, with post-it notes, and we're gonna brainstorm, or we're gonna put shit all over the walls, and we're gonna come up with every possible idea. And I remember thinking, just for me personally, it was too hard, that I really wanted to focus things. And so I came up with this idea of a disruption map. So when Britta and I, years ago, and I think there's one in your guys' books, a few weeks ago, we were coming up with a discussion topic for this. He goes, what do we really want to do? And I'm like, how about disruption? That failure is okay, or challenging people's perceptions is okay. And so what I'm doing now is I just kind of came up with this chart a few weeks ago. I'm actually heading out in 4 weeks to China, to the Shanghai Institute of Art, to teach a disruption class around the idea that you basically brainstorm around 5 paths only. And each pathway of those 5 ideas needs to be completely different than the previous version. So the idea in this map, and we can kind of go over it a little later, is that you have a problem in the middle and then you come up with 5 directions. So the problem might be moving people. Okay, a car. So what's the opposite of a car? How about a skateboard? What's the opposite of a skateboard? How about a submarine? How about a spaceship? How about a unicycle? So there you go. You've got 5 completely radically different directions that you can then ideate or conceptualize, or even go out and talk to the consumer about. What do you think of skateboards? What do you think of submarines? To try and find the best path. So this is just a design kind of philosophy thing that I've been working on in my head for the last few years that I definitely apply to my day-to-day life. And so when it goes back to, and again, you do some reflection, you leave Nike, you're trying to figure out who you are. I went back and I remember looking at this Y-foil bike that's out here. That thing was pulled off the Tour de France starting line for 2 years in a row. People were pissed. Why didn't we consider this before? And I'm like, this is awesome. I was like the only person in this boardroom at Trek thinking this is the best thing possible, because we're not making bikes like everybody else. We're pushing to new spaces. Again, this is in the early 90s. This is long before anybody was doing anything even remotely close to this. And I was just completely excited about what the potential was for this industry. And again, these bikes, that whole collection, Museum of Modern Art, Cooper Hewitt Museum, they've changed things. Those bikes, by the way, that you see out there, one of them is 26 years old. And one is 25 years old. So a couple weeks ago, I went to spring break, went down to Phoenix, took a lap through all the Taliesin and the Frank Lloyd Wright houses. And I remember my 13-year-old son, and she's kind of like, so what, Dad, it's just a house. I'm like, but look at this house. This house is from the 1800s, dude. And he was just like completely taken back. He's like, well, what do you mean? It looks brand new. And I'm like, exactly. In my career as a designer, that's what I do. I disrupt. I kind of piss people off today to make them really happy tomorrow. So the last project that I have here, I purposely didn't show it very well because there's 18 patentable ideas on this, is electric mobility, so electric scooters based on architecture. So the stuff that Chris is talking about, that Bora is doing out there with stretched fabric panels and integrated structures, printing, all that kind of stuff. This is a design, that design there, I did same thing about 26 years ago. And only now does it feel like it's about time that we do something about it. So this is just a little sneak peek as to what I'm kind of doing moving forward in the future. Thank you.
Can I give you this though?
Didn't spit on it, so you're okay.
No, thank you. It just gives me something to hold. No, don't show that yet. That's a discovery that happens later. Okay, so hey, I'm Sonia Kapparian, and I do the couture garments you see out in the hall. And the presentation I'm going to talk to you about has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with that at all. And I really thought that I would practice my talking points. But I ended up with like a squirrel. Oh, another squirrel. And so I'm going to wing it. But I do have some slides, thanks to Mina, wherever you are, Mina, which I threw at her at the last moment. So let's see. Oh, that's the first one. That's me. Okay, so I started out, I'm going to give you a framework for like a background, but a brief one. So in 3rd grade, I had this horrible teacher, and this is the reason I don't have a presentation, because I was going to start out and draw a picture of her, and I just was so traumatized trying to draw a picture of this woman that it blew the rest of my presentation. I just couldn't get past the first page, so I just said, oh well, forget it then. Mrs. Zients taught homeroom, and she taught math, and I loved math. And Mrs. Zients was this old, mean lady, and I remember her saying a couple of things to me. One was that, I'm going to blank out now because I'm sitting in front of you people. One of them was that she happened to be there when we had an art class and we were drawing, and I had drawn a picture of my father. And she heard me saying to one of my friends, this looks like my dad. This is what my dad looks like. And I remember her saying to me later, I heard you bragging about your drawing, and we don't brag here. So Mrs. Zients totally traumatized me for the rest of my life and made me hate not only presenting my work, but also doing math, because she also taught math. And let me say, up until this point, I loved math. I loved it. So fast forward to the next year with Miss Elin, who in my mind, as I picture pictures of her, was like very pretty, and she has her hair up and she's all chic, and lovely. And so she had a talk with my mother. My mother came into school and she said, you need to send your daughter to go get art training somewhere. We can't give her the kind of training she needs here. You need to send her to the Chicago Art Institute. So she did. So I got to go to the Chicago Art Institute every summer for 2 or 3 years. We would take the train in. And it was the most amazing experience for a little kid who'd, to that point, been told, don't do, don't show, don't be part of, don't. And all of a sudden, your mind is blown. You're like, oh my God, there's all these people doing all of these things and they're amazing, and holy shit, where can this lead me? Okay, so fast forward to now, I'm at Parsons. I've chosen Parsons out of a book. I've been going to a private school. They have no training whatsoever about where to go for school. So I went, Parsons, cool, I'm going there. It was the only school I sent a project to. It was the only school I applied to, and I got in. And your first year is a foundation year. And I thought, for sure, I'm going to be an artist. I've always been an artist. My first piece of art was put on permanent display at the San Antonio Art College when I was 2. I'm like, I'm going to be an artist. And I went there, and I'm like, but God, how do you make money being an artist? I don't think they eat or travel or have clothes or do anything that I really want to do. They live in a van, yes. and eat ramen, like a lot of my friends were doing. And so I took a summer course and I went to Cal State Northridge to take editorial art and find out what you do to make money as an artist. And the first 3 times I went in there, the instructor came in drunk. And I was like, okay, this is a sign, not gonna be an artist. So I really wanted to be an architect, and I was like, oh, I should have an architecture degree or whatever. There's no architecture at Parsons. And then someone told me, well, in order to be an architect, you have to be really good at math. And I was like, fuck, math. Thwarted by math. Okay. All right, what's it gonna be then? It's like fashion. And my art instructors were like, oh my God, don't become a fashion designer. They're like armpits, they're everywhere. Anyone can do that. And I was like, well, that means it'll be easy and fun, and I'll make money, and I'll travel. Like, there's no downside to this. Right, I'm all over this. So I went into fashion. So my first year in fashion, and I was pretty scrappy because I had no money. I was paying for my education myself. My first year, I took every single job I could possibly get on the job board. I would be in there ravenously, taking anything, working at night, and then working long hours because Parsons is a tough school. It's very competitive. Doing my other projects. And one of the first projects I did was for a company called Ocean Pacific. And I think this is my first slide, hey. So I tried to find pictures of what I had done for them because it really ended up making a big splash in the market. It was called the Monokini. And basically it was bathing suits that had the top tied to the bottom, and there was all these variations of it. And the one suit on the left is one of mine. But at the time, I was just a student, and I think they were looking for like cheap sketches. But I really analyzed the market, and I really thought about what is going on out there and what don't we have that would be competitive with what's out there and make this company a lot of money. And lo and behold, they ended up buying like 5 designs from me at $400 a pop, which is a lot if you're in art school in the 80s, early 80s, like 81. But they made a shit ton more because it launched this huge swimwear thing for them. So that showed me that, you can be really smart about this and make a lot of money for yourself and for your companies. And so that's the way I approached it after that. So fast forward a couple companies later, I went to Nike. Before that, yes, we all end up at Nike at some point. I went to a company called Quicksilver. I was hired away from a skate company, Jimmy's, that I was working at, which was super scrappy and super alternative, and it was just a band of hoodlums that worked there. But at a certain point, that takes its toll, and you come in, and your boss is hiding under his desk because he's having a Coke moment, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna come back later. This is not good. And I'm like, shit, I gotta get out of here. That disruption daily. Everything was disruption. So I'm like, Quicksilver, that's big, it's solid, it's a big company, let's go for this. So they hired me away, and I brought my friend with me. I was like, if you hire me, you gotta hire her too, because she's gotta leave there too. So of course everyone thought we were lovers. So they're like, oh, there's these 2 gay girls that work in our area, that's so cute. And I'm like, what? But Quicksilver, oh, hey, I've got slides. Quicksilver at the time, this was the industry when I got into Quicksilver. So it was kind of a combination of grunge hadn't exactly happened yet, so these are actually a little bit later than when I got there, but it was like, for women's, it was a combination of goth and Betsy Johnson and prairie skirts and, cheerleader looks. And for men's, it was coming off of hypercolor, which Ocean Pacific had come up with. And when it took off, it tanked just as hard, and it took the whole surf industry with it. So now the surf industry is scrambling to try and figure out what to do. So I walk in there, and I'm creative director for men's. And so I said, let's just turn it around, and let's go in a sportswear direction. So we took Quick, and we literally started doing surf sportswear and creating lifestyle branding out of it. And it took off, and it launched the men's line, and then they had a little women's line called Roxy, which is how they lured me in to begin with, because they said, we'll hire you and you can come do a women's line. And then when they brought me on board, they're like, psych, kidding, you're gonna do the men's, thanks. So at a certain point, They gave me Roxy. Now, this is not Roxy. What this is where the women's surf industry was when they hired me to do Roxy, which is butts. Literally butts, okay? There was no product in women's surf stores for women. There was Reef, which is what you're seeing here, ads of girls and butts. So you could walk in there, you can get a bathing suit, you can get thongs, you could get banana boat. That's it. Flip-flops. You get flip-flops. Okay, so now I've got this brand, and I'm like, killer. So I said, well, you know what I think we should do is we should do board shorts for women. Why not? Women should be out there. Women should be out in the water. Women should have a short that can get wet, you can be active in, then you can dry off in it, you can run around town. And the president of the company said, absolutely not. You will ruin our brand. You will ruin our company. No one will take us seriously anymore. No one's going to buy men's board shorts from a company that makes board shorts for women. And I was just like, what? They're like, and he said literally, chicks shouldn't get in the water. They should stay out of the way. And I was like, oh, game on. Oh, game on. And I was like, but you cannot say to the CEO or the owner of a company, okay, fuck you, because you want to keep your job. So what you have to do is you have to speak with logic, and you have to speak with conviction, and you have to talk about why you believe that this is going to change the face of the surf industry for women, which I did, which to a certain extent made an impression on a few people. And one of them was Danny Kwok, and he got behind the idea, even when Seth Ellison wasn't. And so Danny was the one that championed it, and he said, you know what, I think we should try this thing. And lo and behold, we began the board short line. Now the problem, and then of course t-shirts came with it, you know. The one on the left is taken from wrapping on a toilet that I brought back, and I made a t-shirt out of sparkling clean, sanitized board shorts. But I mean, the whole thing was, it was very tongue-in-cheek and very fun and very lifestyle oriented, and nothing like that existed. So now the big problem was we had this product, but where to put it? Because the surf stores wouldn't take it. There was no place to place this kind of product. So the next hurdle I had to face was like, well, okay, so what we think we're gonna do is we're gonna put Roxy in the limited. And I was like, oh, hell you not. So the limited, for anyone who doesn't know what the limited is like probably H&M would be the modern equivalent of it, right? So it's trashy stuff you turn and burn. Every 6 months, it's something new. What would have happened was the board shorts would have gone in there, our brand would have gone in there, and 6 months later, it would have been old news because it would have been a trend. So I had to argue the fact that we had to now create space in surf stores for women's product. And we did. We brought a great marketing guy on, Randy Hild, and he put together a fantastic marketing program around it. And we started branding, and we created a brand that created a niche in the market, which then started taking off and started funding huge surf events for women. I mean, it just became a huge phenomenon. Out of all of this, there we are in Delia's. Okay, I'll go back to this one. Out of all of this, a huge company that said they didn't believe that women should be in the water now definitely believed that women should be in the water, definitely believed that the surf stores had places for us, and definitely believed they should promote the shit out of it, which they did. And so that's exactly what happened. All of a sudden, the surf stars started opening up, and they realized there was a lot of money to be made here, because women will buy 5 board shorts or 5 shirts or 5 of anything to a men's one. And so, yeah, it was subversive. I wanted to get out there and make sure that, you know, women had the same opportunities and advantages as men, but the way I had to go about presenting it was through financial motivation. And I think that's the thing you need to think about when you're gonna work for a company, is like, it has to be a win-win for everybody. If you work by leading with your head, you have to follow with your heart. If you work through leading with your heart, you have to follow with your head, and you have to have both of those things completely in balance in order to be able to create something that will not only make sense for the market, but make your brand or yourself a lot of money. That's Delia's. Delia's catalog came along at that point and also helped push women's lifestyle branding like over the top. And really that's a big part of what like the early 90s was about in California was Delia's catalog. This is Lisa Anderson. She's one of the top women surfers at the time in the world. And what I love about this photo was not only just Lisa paddling out in the water for an obvious photo op, but is that she's got her daughter out in the water with her. And this is what I wanted to see was, I wanted to see another young, you know, another generation of women coming up to experience, like, this is what we have. Like, our mom's a surfer, she's badass, you know? I'm gonna be a badass, I'm gonna be a surfer too. Oh, hey, hang on now. That's a picture of the Dalai Lama. Now, the only reason that's in there is because when I was looking for pictures, disruption, I was looking, squirrel, I was looking for pictures on the reef thing, you know, and I got all the butts, and for some reason there was a picture of Dalai Lama, I think because he might be wearing reef sandals, and I was like, oh, I like him, I'm gonna put him in there. So there he is. So, now that brings us to present day. I'm gonna skip over Nike because, I don't know, it's worth skipping over. So, I worked on volleyball there, and I worked on, I don't know, Olympic product and NBA in college, and it was great. Okay, so now this brings me to what I do today, which is bespoke couture. And why do I like doing this? Because instead of having to disrupt huge companies and take their brands in new directions like Nike or Quicksilver or O'Neill, where I was global branding director, I get to disrupt my process every single day, which my brain really likes. I don't like to do the same thing twice. I don't like to work in an office. But what I do like to do is be challenged every single time I work with a client to do something completely new. Re-engineer, reinvent, redesign, rethink about what I'm doing every single time I do it. So these are some pictures that Mina pulled together for me because she's awesome. These are some photo shoots that I had done from like 2014 because I never update my website and I suck. And this is the project that I'm currently doing with Creative Capital in Bora, which is going to be opening at Pica tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, you don't need that. You've got one, but you need that.
All right, so this is what happens when you're the last one to turn your slides in. You go last. So I'm Chris Linn. I'm a partner with Bora Architects. We're here in Portland, about 70 of us. We do work of all kinds all over. Matt asked the designers to raise their hands. I'm going to ask you guys to do that one more time. So who in here is a designer? Okay, a lot. How many of you became designers so that you could have total and complete artistic control over your unique and individual vision? Okay, that was me. When I was 12, I got turned on to architecture by this guy. This is Howard Rourke. And if anyone has read The Fountainhead or seen the movie, yeah, okay, so that's what really turned me onto architecture. The idea that you could have this visceral, creative vision and go to the ends of the earth to execute it. And you can see how that appeals to, you know, a 12-year-old. I had a real life Howard Rourke in my life. My uncle was one of the architects for the World Trade Center. He worked in Yamasaki's office and eventually sort of became the manager of the, kind of the mayor of the World Trade Center, the whole town. And so to me, there was nothing cooler than, you know, going to Lower Manhattan and down to Radio Row, and just with like the sweep of an arm, it's like gone. So everything in the highlighted area was Radio Row, which was this amazing historic neighborhood that was gone, wiped away, and the World Trade Center, this pure vision of modernism, was sort of dropped in its place. And in fact, this kind of control in architecture was the paradigm for the profession when I started. This is what schools taught you to do. They taught you how to think this way. And this was kind of what architects and urban designers did. And in fact, we have examples here in Portland where this happened. This is the Rose Quarter. This is where the Memorial Coliseum is now. An amazing, diverse, artistic, cultural neighborhood. wiped away in a single stroke of a pen, the grid erased, a really cool building put there, but a pretty bad neighborhood was made there as well. And so, for me, as I was getting older, I really enjoyed spending time in the historic, cool neighborhoods with a lot of diversity and stories. And it was really not a lot of fun to hang out in places like this, and in fact, it still really isn't. So I think one of the great disruptors for me, and actually in our profession, is a woman named Jane Jacobs. So does anybody know who Jane Jacobs is? Okay, there's an amazing documentary on Netflix called Citizen Jane. Watch it. She took on a guy named Robert Moses, who was the head of Public Works in New York. And Robert Moses wanted to basically tear down the village, Greenwich Village, and build a, something like the World Trade Center down there. And Jane Jacobs just said no. She's an activist. She rallied the neighborhood and defeated Robert Moses. And this is sort of an epic urban design battle. It's a great story. And to me, it showed that stories, people's history, as they're sort of embedded in design, are really a lot more interesting than sort of minimalist objects that a lot of architects tend to fixate on. So that was a sort of a moment of disruption for me, that this idea of individual control maybe needs to be disrupted by collaboration with neighbors, listening to people, and trying to tell their stories in design as well. So, long story made short, a few years later, I found myself working on as the lead designer on the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, which is essentially a museum dedicated to telling the stories of the Underground Railroad, of slavery, of freedom, of escape. It's really all about stories because there are very few artifacts from that area, from that era. And so what became interesting to me and sort of disrupted my idea of architects in control was really this project. And we spent 1 year as a team listening to historians, doing research, before we even put one line on the paper. And so it's this idea of listening to a diverse audience and finding a way to bring that to life. One of the great storytellers in this institution is a guy named Carl Westmoreland, who's in the middle there. And so Carl had discovered this slave cabin, essentially a slave prison, in Kentucky, built inside of an old barn. Actually, an old barn had been built over it. And so there was this perfectly preserved artifact from the era. And working with Carl, we figured out a way to actually dismantle it and rebuild it inside of the museum. And it's one of the most sort of moving moments inside that building. And it didn't come from a place of an architect trying to control the outcome. It came from a really strong place of collaboration and listening. And so that's my theme I'm getting to over and over again, is that really being an active listener, a good listener, being patient, listening with a point of view is how we disrupt work and create things at Bora. So what that led to was a project here at Oregon State University in Corvallis, where the brief was we need a lecture hall for 600 people. And you know what those look like. Everyone's been in those. What they told us also was, people in the back row fall asleep, kind of like some of you back there, and we can't really see them. And when you're really more than 6 or 7 rows away from somebody, you can't engage them with eye contact. So again, a round of iteration and listening led to one of the first round lecture halls in the country, in colleges, with media in 360 degrees. And so there's 600 people, but you're never more than just a couple rows from the front. And the results that they're getting in terms of testing and student engagement from this space are off the charts. And we're building a bunch more. And in fact, on your way out, if you want to go through our little VR tour that we have in the conference room, that's the next iteration of this project at Texas A&M University. I think also to be disruptive, you need to work with diverse partners, take on diverse projects, and I think listen to the own diversity in your office. So when our youngest and most talented designers came to us and said, you know, to the management committee of all things, like really, they had guts. They said, we want to do this fabric structure for Design Week. And really, courage, I think, is part of disruption. So we said, sure, let's do it, we'll support you. And actually, they're all here tonight. And you saw the model that's in the lobby. That's a scale model. The real thing is about as big as a house. And it's at Pica. And it was a collaboration with us and many of the other people here in this room. And so this is how our office got disrupted. We had senior management smocking, I think it's called, right? So, yeah, that had never happened before. Yeah. And so, you know, if there's any takeaways, and I wanted to leave some takeaways, is, you know, being an active listener, but with a point of view. So listening, but also being an advocate for your ideas. Radical diversity, both in the people you hire, the projects you seek, the partners you work with. And technology has a big role in disruption for us. So whether it's virtual reality or parametric modeling, you just have to sort of embrace that stuff that's out there on the edge, find people a generation younger than you who know how to do it, and give them the power to do it. And that's what we do at Bora. That's my story. Thanks.
Thanks, guys, for that. And I gotta say, you guys have already disrupted this talk because I was thinking like 3 minutes each. But I laugh about it because I think it's better this way. Like I had like 25 questions to ask you that probably wouldn't get you talking as much as you just talking about your own work. And I thought, like, you don't even need me up here. What am I doing here? You know? But I do have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. Both Trish and Matt, I was thinking, listening to your talks, that in both ways, you reminded me about the relationship between the old and the new, or maybe between tradition and contemporary ideas, and that, you know, Trish, when I talked with you about your talk, you were talking about disrupting education and the use of technology and that sort of thing. And then, you know, when I looked at your work, I really saw some of the tradition in that. And then I felt like I had a similar reaction, Matt, as well, that, you know, when we talked, you were talking about, we got talking about the idea that real innovation isn't necessarily completely reinventing the wheel and creating something so different that people don't recognize it. It's sort of taking something that exists often and kind of twisting it. And so I would love to ask either or both of you about, you know, the relationship between the old and the new. And you know, Chris, seeing you there, this is something that comes up in architecture as well. Like, you know, we find a lot of times in architecture when we try and create buildings that channel the past, that it can be a bit too much of a cartoon, like maybe the Portland building is, for example, postmodern architecture. And yet there ought to be some kind of way of creating a neo-historic architecture that is honoring the past without creating a caricature. And so I guess really for any of you, I'm just interested in this idea of the relationship between the past and creating something new. And I know there's no one answer about finding that balance, but I wonder if either of you could talk a little bit about your own journey of trying to find that right feeling.
I think when I'm teaching, I think it's important for my students to have both and know what goes with traditional techniques, but also look at the future. I mean, for me, it comes down to sort of sustainability, as I was talking about before. Like some of the tools and some of the techniques that they use in textiles are just not good for the planet. Mm-hmm. And so innovation in that respect, I really want to go forward with. I think that my students, you know, it's so important for them to know the traditional crafts, but then to take it to another level and then look at what's in the future in terms of how to do it in a sustainable manner. Mm-hmm. And that may include using smart fabrics, or that may include, I don't know, finding a way to make leather from seaweed, and all sorts of things that are going on now in textiles. But just really important for them to do both. I don't see it as something that they need each other, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Maybe two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and even in my own work, you know, I love making things and being a maker, but I also like using technology. You know, I burn into things, I like laser cutting and all sorts of stuff that goes with my work. But I also like the process of just painting wax onto batik for hours on end, you know. But then maybe using some sort of dye that's sustainable and high tech, you know. So I think they can exist together.
Yeah. And Mark, you know, when you were talking about the Trek bike, and it was kind of revolutionary in some ways, and yet you reminded me how much in so many design disciplines, sort of being ever sort of ready to try new materials and new technologies is important too. Like it really, even though the form of that bike is extraordinary, it's perhaps the story of carbon fiber as well.
I always work in terms of threes. So the first one is the mild, and the third one is the wild. The mild is what people already maybe expect. That, in a way, is what is briefed in. That might even be what has already been done. So whenever any designers there, if you're looking at a white piece of paper or a blank screen, it's terrifying because you're like, crap, I don't even know where to begin. What I typically do with the bikes is I took a lap to the factory, I took a look at what a bicycle is, how it's made. I look at all the traditional components to it, whether it be, again, the components or the material or the colors. And then I go back to my office, and if there is a brief, I would just turn it over and put it away. And I would just start fresh. But typically, for me, I like to start with what people already know and what they expect, and then push it into something completely different and new.
Yeah.
So aerospace industry, new technologies, or what led to those bikes being the way they are now.
Right. And I have a question that could be answered by a number of you, particularly Sonia and Mark. I think of you, Sonia and Matt, excuse me. I think of you having come from Nike. I'm curious about the role that the size of the operation you're involved with plays. And like Sonia, you know, you told the story of trying to get Quicksilver to listen to your great idea and kind of, you know, having some time banging your head on the wall. And I'm sure for both of you at Nike, given just how big that company is, that you had that as well. And in your case, you both went on a journey through these different companies to working for yourselves. And at the same time, maybe somebody else's journey may be just the opposite or whatever. But how does the size of the entity, whether it's a corporation or a small company or a sole proprietorship, what about how that factors in?
Well, you know, it's like the Titanic, right? It's hard to turn a big ship. You have a small craft. You can be pretty quick with it, right? So when you're talking to a big company that has a lot of money on the line, like my experience at Nike, I started out in NBA and college basketball, which is crazy because I'm like not a basketball person, but that's where they put me.
Not very tall.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Why you gotta be like that? So you know, they threw the next thing at me, which is like, there's this division that nobody really cares about because it's not real product, and it's called training. And I'm like, well, what's training? And they're like, well, you know, it doesn't really speak to any particular sport. It's just sort of like, you know, the clothes that you hang out in. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's sportswear. That's where you're gonna make your money. They're like, do you want to take training? I'm like, hell yeah, I'll take training. So I took training. And what's training now? It's the biggest money earner in all of Nike, isn't it? And how many subdivisions does it have? So, you know, I think, you know, you can take small areas in big companies and turn them around. You just have to, you know, speak really intelligently to why it is that you're taking something in this new direction. Speak it with conviction, but really speak it from a standpoint of logic to follow your passion. And even with a very large company, you can do it.
But there's a big difference between the big and the small. Big companies, yeah, you can look at, you're just another number, you're another designer in a big old machine. But also, too, you get a chance to kind of dabble around, you get to look around at other groups and see what other organizations are doing. I can walk over to soccer and see what they're up to, lifestyle. You get to travel a lot and do all sorts of different things. But you also, too, have a different dynamic of lots of people that you have to work with. When you're the small guy, you feel every bump in the road. If you're not hustling for something, you're not doing anything. And so there's something to be said with the big companies about knowing what your project's going to be, and you can mow through them. You know, you have budget to travel, especially, again, this is a Nike thing, right? Nike's got money for marketing and promotions and everything. The small companies, you feel better about what you're doing because you have a greater sense of accomplishment because it's you. You and maybe, 5 or 10 people, or just you by yourself. Nike, you don't feel that. You're always a team piece. And so it depends on your type of personality as to which space you feel the most comfortable in and how you're able to prosper the most.
I'm just going to add one small thing to that, and that is exactly what Matt was speaking to. And when I left Nike, I literally said to them, I'm sorry, but you could have a trained monkey do what I do for you here. And they were really taken aback by that. They were just like, you don't say that. And I was like, no, I really mean it. You could have a trained monkey do what I do for you here. I'm using this much of my brain. When you work for a small company, you go out, you develop your own fabrics, you work directly with mills, you're innovating, you're doing things all the time. When you get to a big company, your role is this much. And if that's something that you're comfortable with, that's great. You may be able to find things where you can find your creativity and expand your mind and get your teeth into something that feels really rewarding, or you can just feel like, what the hell am I doing here?
Absolutely. Mark, I was going to ask you as well, listening to your talk and hearing your story, it just kind of blows my mind that you really had a chance to meet an interesting wide variety of really talented, passionate people from a variety of different sort of tribes, whether it's BMX or music or so much else. And I know every person's story is different, but I'm curious if there are connecting threads for you, like if you find moments in your current job where you see someone and perhaps they remind you of somebody you encountered at one of the magazines you worked on earlier in your career, and I'm wondering if there's a connecting thread you see between some of the different people and talents. I feel like you've sort of hopscotched a little bit from different kind of cultural tribes, and I'm curious, like, if you see a connecting thread in some of the people you've talked about and worked with, and that they were talented, but they also just kind of wouldn't take no for an answer, it seems like. And I don't know if that's something you would say about, Spike Jonze versus, a BMX star, but, what about that, to the degree that exists, about that connecting thread in terms of some of the talents you worked with?
Well, to go from one culture to the next, that's kind of weird. Disruption is that's the most fertile ground almost, like the gaps between, there's bicycles and there's motorcycles. What's between that? Maybe electric bikes, finding those spaces in culture, like skateboarding and punk rock were kind of kindred spirits. And they were about rebellion and being creative in different ways, but they also had those shared values, and they complemented each other. Like, it was the soundtrack for all this attitude, or the visual energy you put on the graphics became kind of like the same thing you looked at in the album covers. So in my career, the desire to move from one world to the next was a way to kind of pollinate my mind and get a little bit of inspiration I could borrow from and apply in a new place, in a new way, and see if it worked.
Yeah. And you mentioned inspiration, and that makes me think of something I talked with both Chris and Sonia about. I got talking with each of you about things that you do outside of your job, outside of your profession, that seem to do something for you. Sonia, you talked about fixing up old houses, and it was fascinating to me because you talked about being attracted to old houses, but then doing a kind of renovation that would be a little bit unexpected or would not be by road. And Chris, you talked to me about having a passion for winemaking, and that you like sort of going from almost, you could say, like the seed to the glass. And here your talk was about how you had sort of gone on the journey away from the fountainhead architect to this really energizing and collaborative culture. And yet what struck me about winemaking is there's, besides just the opportunity to create a really nice beverage, there's the opportunity to sort of be in control of each stage of that process. And so, I bet the two of you must be so damn busy, and you know, where do you find time to engage in like winemaking or fixing up a house? And yet, obviously, it's important to you, and you get something out of it. And I feel like there's a little bit of Walter Mitty in me, who always wants to, you know, be playing hooky and you know, watching a Japanese noir from the 50s or something, and so I would love to hear from either of you about, you know, that you know, this notion that so many of us have a kind of parallel passion, and you have to kind of channel that a little bit, even if it doesn't directly relate to the success of your career and your disruptive ideas in your own discipline.
Well, I enjoy drinking it as much as I do making it. And in some sense, I think I was drawn to winemaking for that sense of control. And I think what I learned is that it's actually a team sport. My collaborator, my wife, is here. And it really doesn't happen without sort of a diverse set of talents. So I'm great at, like, you know, clipping the grapes off the vine and lugging things around. But it's a living thing that, you know, has yeast in it, it's alive. And I can't do that, but Barbara has the magic touch and makes things sort of live and grow. So I think it's one of those things where I sort of went into it for one reason and learned that it's actually a very different thing.
Just like architecture.
Just like architecture.
And you know, maybe there's something to be said about finding, again, the kind of middle ground where you feel like, to some degree, you have a strong sense that your fingerprint is part of this,
Right.
But at the same time, it's not just all about you, and there are people with in the room with better ideas potentially, and you know, what's
sure.
the Picasso, like, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right,
You know?
right, yeah.
I also wanted to ask any of you about being in Portland, and I don't want to sound like like a travel booster for the city or something like that, but in a way it's kind of like, for some of you, a little bit of a disruptive act just to be in Portland. Like, maybe you should be in New York or LA, and it might be good for business, and you know, God, Trish, what are you doing here? Like, London is so great, you know? But then as I got talking with each of you, you know, we had similar conversations about being in a smaller yet kind of creative city like Portland, and maybe it's a kind of right-sized city for some of us, that it's big enough to be a cosmopolitan city that thankfully attracts people from all over the world, and you know, hopefully lots of immigrants will be able to still come to Portland in the years ahead, and yet you know, it's a little bit of a small town in some ways too, and I think more so than size, it seems like there's something of a bit of a currency in the sense of collaboration, and that it's not quite as cutthroat. You know, you're not rooting for other people's failure so much. Like, it reminds me of like when I watch, you know, tennis versus the NFL or something. Like, you know, what a concept. You know, people are actually happy for each other. You know, so how much does that resonate for you, any of you? And conversely, I suppose you have times where you're going, you know, boy, this is a really small town. You know, or you know, not a very diverse town, or you know, a town with a dubious past in some ways. So, you know, what keeps you here, or, you know, could any of you talk about Portland as a place to do good work?
Well, I moved here from Los Angeles, you know, 27 years ago. And one of the things that really attracted me to Portland was, you know, there's a great tradition of architects and architecture here. There's a lot of architects who are really talented, and there's not enough work here for all the architects to just work in Portland. So we all see each other at the airport, going to various places. But early on, I learned that in Portland, the architects are very collegial with each other. And if one firm is busy and another is not, that firms will actually loan employees to each other, which I've never come across that in any other city, or really any other industry. And then, and what goes around comes around. So now we're busy and you're not, so we'll loan people back to you. And so that was like a really subtle thing that attracted me to Portland initially, that kind of collaboration.
It reminds me of an article I read many years ago. I think it was by the Oregonian columnist Steve Dean, and it was called The Gore-Tex Vortex. And he talked about this basic idea that in the time of the Great Migration, there was a moment where the Oregon Trail split, and you could either go north to Oregon or basically south or southwest, northwest and southwest to Oregon and California. And it's obviously a gross oversimplification, but the basic premise was that those who sought riches from the gold rush or fame and fortune went to California, and those who wanted to have their own farm or just have a kind of beautiful, safe place to live their lives came to Oregon. And so, maybe it's just me telling that to myself because I live here too, and we all want to live our city, love where we live and everything. But I love that idea that there's something nourishing here.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it exactly, because we were on our way to LA, that was where we were going. And then, my husband Neil came to Oregon and he met, I think he was at, I don't know if he was at Nike or Pendleton or Janssen, and he'd been talking to everybody and he just phoned me up and said we ought to move here instead. There's just something about this city. And I moved here without even out visiting, basically. We just had a kid. And I was like, I'm ready to get out of New York. I thought we were going to California, but, I said, well, we could always move. We're on the same coast. And, what I discovered was a city where there was so much opportunity. I mean, we were artists and we'd been sort of priced out of having space even in New York. And then nobody was defined by what they did. Basically, you could have, a PhD who was a painter, or somebody who worked in Trader Joe's who was a photographer, or, everybody was doing something else. And I really like that idea because in New York, a lot of us were defined by, oh yeah, you're a textile designer and you work for blah, blah, blah. And there was a whole load of spiel that went with you. And it was kind of nice just to be here and you're just Trish, and, and then just space to work, for an artist, that's so important. I mean, I've never worked for a corporate company, so that's just, something that I have to have, to be able to, do my work. So Portland has many opportunities.
It's great. I remember when I was 18, I enrolled at a college in New York City, sight unseen, just because I wanted to be part of a kind of diaspora from all over the world, of people sort of deliberately choosing to go there. And then I started over time to sort of discover that Oregon had an element of that too. Like, am I correct in remembering that none of you were native to Portland or to Oregon?
I'm from LA, yeah.
Yeah, so I love this. I feel like during the 21 years or so in Portland I've spent here, it's kind of uncommon that my favorite people or the people who impress me the most are from here. And I've got some great high school friends, I love them, but the idea that especially given our sort of exclusionary past in Oregon, the idea that we can create a kind of attractive model to bring some of you all talented people here is great. So I think this is maybe the moment where we could open it up to audience questioning, and I believe there's a mic that is going to be passed both figuratively and literally. Does anybody have a question? Or you could even take my microphone, actually. Anybody? Yeah.
I'll take your mic too. So some of you have talked about how you forged your own path, so to speak. You really pursued opportunities that appealed to you, or you had something in mind and you chased it. Mark, you wrote to this editor of this magazine every day for a month or something. And in a lot of cases, it sounds like opportunities were also presented to you. You were given a chance. You were given free rent for a long time or something like that. So I'm curious, what do you do, or how do you feel about your role as disruptors and creators in sort of creating those opportunities and spaces and platforms for the next generation of disruptors and designers?
I can speak to that one. I've been a college adjunct professor, research fellow for the last probably 20 years or so. And one of the first things I tell students is when you're about ready to graduate, or even when you're about ready to start school, turn around and look within. What are you good at? For me, if I looked externally around other people, I got really psyched out really fast. Like, I can't draw like that guy. I can't make buildings like that guy. I get really kind of caught up to where if I know who I am, then I just base all of my decisions moving forward off of what I like to do. So for me, I've always been just kind of wickedly creative and able to figure things out as I go. I had no plan whatsoever other than I just wanted to have fun and make some really cool projects, as oversimplified as that sounds. But I knew that I was really confident deep down, and I knew I could do this a little bit. I knew what skill sets that I was maybe better than most people were at. So I would just say the answer to that is just look within yourself to figure out what you think you're good at, what you really like to do that.
And don't wait for permission. No one's going to ask you to come and join the movement or the moment. You know, you can seize it if it's in your heart and find a way to work within that small community that everyone's on the same level. They're all there. They would pay to do that thing because they love it so much. So you have that in common and work from there. You know.
I think Portland is the easiest place to start doing something on your own compared to any other city, and it's not because it's the most affordable city anymore, or there's, you know, tremendous opportunities for every product you could possibly make, but because it is so welcoming and it's so supportive and it's so not, you know, Portland doesn't eat its young. People take care of each other here. You know, creatives tend to band together. They tend to applaud each other. They tend to share resources. It's the complete opposite of working in a place like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is like the most dysfunctional relationship you will ever have in your life. And you don't even realize till after you've left that you've got black eyes or broken ribs or whatever it may be, you know?
Yeah, over here.
I think this question is probably for Chris, because I think you've probably thought about this the most. When you were talking about your process of talking to communities and getting to know people and places, and then also looking at your example of the Memorial Coliseum, I think about how the built environment that we have today is a reflection of some of the injustices and processes that have happened in the past. And I think about and want to ask you about the does the disruption also extend into disrupting some of that kind of institutionalized racism in our neighborhoods and maybe gentrification? Are there ways that you can inform and disrupt some of that as well?
Wow, that's a great question. Disrupting the sort of larger scale economic forces that are driving gentrification. That takes a village. You know, I think that's more than just one architect or one planner or one citizen. And you know, it's really one of the reasons I admire Jane Jacobs so much is, you know, she was one person with a vision and was tenacious, but really rallied everything. I think from the ground up, kind of a grassroots movement. And I think we're starting to see some of that now in Portland. Over the past couple of years, there's been a city-wide planning effort to basically upzone all of Portland. It's called the 2035 plan. And you know, in some cases it makes a lot of sense, but there are a lot of neighborhoods that I think could potentially be displaced through that process. And you're seeing a lot of citizen activists now in Portland rally around this and push back. And I think Portland is still one of those places where a small group of determined people can make a difference. And that's another reason I think I'm drawn to this place.
I have the mic and I have a question.
You have
Way
the
ahead
power.
of you. Well, first of all, thank you so much. It was really inspiring hearing your stories and very motivating for me, and I'm sure for everyone else here as well. So thank you for sharing those with us. I think that my question is a little bit more introspective. Maybe it's a bit related to the first question that you heard. It seems to me that all of you were very determined and very certain about what you were doing and where you wanted to be in your careers and with things that are just generally inspiring to you. But there are these moments, I guess for me, if I wanted to compare myself with your stories and your journey, it's just these moments of definite doubt in the face of everyone telling you that you can't do it, or it can be done, or not even that, but just knowing that you want to get somewhere, but you don't really know how to get there and what that path is. And so I think that my big question is, what did you do in those moments of doubt, and how did you keep it going to be where you are now?
Well, I mean, I gave you kind of a synopsis. I mean, I think I've changed careers like 5 times before I got to where I am right now. Because I, first of all, thought I was going to be an architect, and then I wasn't going to be an architect. Then I was going to be an artist, and then I wasn't going to be an artist. Then I was going to be a fashion designer. And then I decided I was going to be an illustrator, and then the illustration market crashed because everyone went to photography. So then I was back to being a fashion designer. And, you know, I mean, it's been back and forth, and then I moved out here because they said, oh, you can work for Nike, and then you can be an artist. Right. And then I went into the arts, and then what do we have? A recession. Arts died. So then I'm back to fashion. So, you know, I think the nature of being a creative is always facing disruption, because in a creative role, you're not creating something quite often that is as simple as, you know, the next roll of toilet paper that you need, or the next bottle of water, or the next whatever. A lot of times what you're creating is something that's a luxury item, or it's something that's a secondary item. It's not a necessity. And so, you know, you're always thinking of, well, if not that, then how about this? If not this, then how about that? You know, and there's not that much difference between, you know, the mental process of designing a house, or designing a dress, or creating a sculpture, or doing anything else. It's just realigning your focus. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, it's about being flexible too, right? You got the same thing here. I started cycling, and those bikes 25 years ago, that's nothing to what I'm doing now. Then it went into digital, web design, did the Napster website back in the day, did the TiVo box, the first DVR. It's just kind of whatever happens, you just have to be kind of flexible and just kind of roll with it and see what happens. And now, I left Nike, 2 years ago, and people just see, oh, Nike, oh, I have a footwear design project. And last summer, I'm like, I don't know anything about shoes. I mean, I've been around it, I guess. And then they ask, can you do it? And I'm like, sure, I can do that. And so now I just finished another project with Amazon around footwear design. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know the basics, story on. But I know the basics of design and how molded parts are made, how cut and sew is made. I know how to put these different kind of ingredients together. But I think at the end of the day, you have to be really flexible. Otherwise, you're going to get all bent out of shape. It's like, wait a second, I've been a basketball footwear designer my whole career. I need to find that job. Well, good luck, because that's where I would be stressed out if I was that one-trick pony.
I just want to say one thing about always saying yes, and I've put myself in a lot of problems, given myself a lot of problems with that. But I always say yes, and my husband always says, "Why did you say yes to that project?" But I think in some ways, if it makes you uncomfortable, don't be scared to fail. We've talked about this before. I mean, I think just, you know, go for it. You know. Sometimes it's impossible and it won't work, but in most cases, in 99% of the time, I have said yes, I found a way, and I've surprised myself. So, always say yes, I would say, and then take it from there, and just stop the doubt, you know.
You can make your failure your best moment. Look at Evel Knievel. Like the clip that they show in the highlight reel is the Caesar's Palace bail, right? Knocks back a shot of wild turkey and floors it, and he makes the newsreel. So don't be afraid of having some kind of public demonstration of this didn't work, because it can still define a bigger story for you, you know, versus Philo Farnsworth. Does anyone know who that is? Philo Farnsworth invented the television, and he quietly pitched it to his bosses at the Radio Corporation of America, who were in the radio business, and he said, fuck, that idea is stupid. Let's do something with this. And he didn't continue on after that single failure, and he drank himself to death and died anonymously, you know?
So don't drink yourself to death. Just be flexible.
Don't
roll with
be
it.
like
It's all good.
Down around.
Nice.
Let's bring it back up. Let's really vibes going.
I was just gonna say also, you asked about doubt and dealing with doubt. Like I feel like I wanted to tell you that there's no exact answer to that, but maybe there's some comfort in that. Like I worried so much just about hosting this panel, you know, and I feel like, you know, they're the experts, not me, but I would just say sort of persevere and you're not alone. So, another question.
I had a question about kind of the moment you realized that what you were doing was going to be disruptive and it was big. Kind of what that moment of like you realized you were holding on to lightning in a bottle. And kind of, you know, was it something that you knew innately before you even started the project, or like, can you speak to just the realization that you were holding on to something big?
I don't know, for me, every time I've done a project where I knew it was going to be big and successful, the hairs on my arm would go up. You know, it would be something so physical that it's just like a wave that takes over your whole body. It's like electricity, and you're like, holy shit, this is going to be good. And you know, right in that second, just the second you conceive of it, that yeah, it's gonna be big.
And sometimes it doesn't happen right away. It takes time. You don't realize right off the bat if something is successful or not. It's only later when you get a chance to reflect on it and go, wow, that was pretty cool, because success is defined so many different ways. You sold 100,000 units, or you got in the Museum of Modern Art, or whatever that was. Success is defined differently. So for me, I think, like the bike stuff took off immediately. It was like, holy crap. And I was like, wow, I had an idea that it would be really neat, but I had no idea because I wasn't a part of that industry. I was kind of coming from the outside. Other projects like Napster, we kind of knew that was kind of a big deal because you got free stuff, you got free music, and that was pretty sweet. But yeah, you just have to, again, recognize immediately. I always look at it almost like music. When you listen to a song, you might think it's okay at first, but it grows on you over time. So a lot of the most successful projects I've had have definitely gotten better and better over time.
I think for us, we do a lot of, our projects are big, complicated projects. They're buildings and campuses, and they involve a lot of people and big teams. And I know something's happening. I know something really good is happening when the team is there on the weekend, or they get in early, or they work late, and there's just an energy about it. And you're getting the same thing from everybody on the team, you know, the engineers, the client as well. So that's usually a sign that there's a really positive energy and things are going well. And then there are those jobs where, you know, nobody shows up till 9 and at 5 o'clock they're gone. And those things happen too. And so you gotta work through those, but there are those when everybody is willing to volunteer their time, which is kind of the most precious commodity that anyone has. I think that's when we know we're onto something. So tomorrow night, come to Pica and see this thing that was essentially a volunteer effort. And I can tell it's going to be something pretty magical.
I think it's a lesson every 14-year-old kid learns when they find some stash of fireworks. If you light a big enough one off, you hear the echo, you know? When your work hits culture and you hear about it, or it comes back from a source beyond your own peer group, and you make an impact that way, and it's like, oh, we did this little thing, we thought it was just gonna be this, and suddenly it's, you know, somebody's bidding it up on eBay and paying way more than the commercial price was, or kids are smashing bus shelter glass and stealing the art out of it because the photo you took, or your word got in the dictionary or something. You know, those moments are culture answering your call.
Well, there's also the opposite too. I saw a homeless guy riding one of my bikes through the streets of San Francisco. I remember thinking, it's over. Third most influential mountain bike of all time, some homeless guy. Obviously found it in the dumpster, and he was just squeaking down the street on it. And I was like, wow, it's like, dude, you know, rolling in a Ferrari or something. Like, no, that's the opposite. That's a cool bike, please get off that.
I think we've got time for one more question, and then of course there'll be time for you to all talk individually if you like. Yes, why don't I actually hand the microphone?
Hi guys, thanks for speaking to us tonight. I just wanted to ask, since you guys have experience now as someone who's been trapped in the like can't get experience without experience circle. I don't know if you guys know what that's like. You know, getting denied a lot of work because of that. And I don't know if you guys have ever hired somebody or like seek out talent, but like how do you get there? How do you get the experience without experience? How do you get someone to hire you, you know, right out of college? Like, is there anything that you have to say?
I would say, for me, when I was in New York and I felt that there was no job that I really wanted to do, it was either go to a great big company. People don't think it's a good idea. They would think you have to have experience and then you go and, you know, start your own business. But if there's something you really want to do, just do it. Make your own, you know, make your own destiny. I think that you can always do that, especially if you haven't got any commitments, as in family ties. You've got nothing to lose. So, you know, just go for it. You know, if there's something that you really want to do, then you should just do it. You can get caught up in how do I get experience. I mean, take an internship if you want to, but I think that you just have to sort of make time to sort of fiddle around with what's interesting to you and then sit and do that. I mean, there's no time like the present to do something. I don't think you need to wait.
Well, I happened to get really, really lucky and someone took a chance on me, and a lot of people I talk to who are, you know, a few years out of college are saying the same thing, but it's just really hard. And I have lots of friends who are still in school who are about to be where I was a couple years ago, and I want to tell them something and I don't know what to say because I'm like, it's just hard.
Well, just keep creating. You know, your work's always going to get better, and eventually, you know, you'll get exposure and someone will look at it. But the process, keep the creative process going. I mean, because that's part of who you are. So, you know.
You know, back in the old days, I was the first designer at Trek, and I got the phone number off the helmet box at the local bike shop. This is like, what, early 90s? I literally just started making calls. I sent off over 350 resumes, because and really, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what was really hot. I wasn't really into this. I wasn't really super passionate about one thing. Nowadays, it's all about a digital presence. Put a portfolio up on Behance, be active on LinkedIn, comment on different things. I get a lot of my jobs now just people, hey, I like that comment that you had or that talk that you gave. What do you think about this? So I think the way things are done now is way more connected. If anything, it's a hell of a lot easier now because you can create this digital persona of who you are and maybe even who you want it to be. So again, if you want to work at Nike, then you need to start showing things that are relevant to Nike or to that brand. If you want to do more print stuff, then okay, what are the top 5 print places out there? And then you got to start projecting yourself into those environments, stylistically, skill-wise, just with your network, whatever. But you have to be relevant.
I really hate to say this because I'd love to have a double espresso and go on for another couple hours, but I think it's the moment at which we give a big round of applause and thank everyone for coming.